tweet using the hashtag, what is it, CNN at CTS, CNN at CTS, and also the hashtag Believer, BELIEVER, I before E except after C. So just want to remind you, those of you who are joining us live stream, please tweet via social media, and we'll try to get some of your questions as well. Let's begin.
Okay.
So, let's see. There was No God But God, Zealot. You say that you were an evangelical Christian.
I was, yes.
And now a Muslim.
Yes.
And so you're going to show us some things from Scientology, Santa Muerta, the Agori. What's going on with you, Reza Aslan? Have your beliefs changed, or the object or the source of your beliefs changed?
No, as a matter of fact. I mean, I think the most important distinction that you could make, not just as somebody who studies religion or as somebody who does belong to a particular religion, but just as human beings, the most important distinction that you could make is between religion and faith. These are not the same thing. Faith is inexpressible, it's indescribable, it's ineffable, it's a purely individual experience. It's a search, for transcendence. Religion is the language we use to express faith. That's what it's for. It's a language made up of symbols and metaphors. It provides a way to express that which is inexpressible. It's a way for us to talk about, this crazy, mysterious thing called faith. And so my faith hasn't changed at all, even when it changed religions. I basically just changed the language that I was using to express that faith. And certainly this experience of going around the world and immersing myself in these different religions, thinking about faith in these different ways, all that's really done for me is, and I mean this quite honestly, is just, it's made me more certain of that fact that while we may be speaking different languages, we are all saying the same thing.
I read in an LA Times article you wrote a couple of years ago where you say religion, it's really about using a different metaphor for the same emotion.
Yeah.
What's that? What are those metaphors? What's that emotion?
I mean, okay. Well, let's do a little experiment, shall we? So this probably won't work that well here because there are so many religiously literate people in this room. But let's try it. So if I said, "I have been washed by the blood of the Lamb," raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So raise your hand if you don't. Okay. So I used a metaphor. That's what that is. It's a metaphor. And for those of you who understand the metaphor, for those of you who speak my language, you and I shared a moment, a profound moment of connection there. If you understand the metaphor, then you understand the emotions, the sentiment that metaphor represents. And so, because we understand each other, we connect in that way. If you don't understand the metaphor, washed by the blood of the Lamb, what does that even mean? It makes no sense to you. And so that's when I say that religion is a language, that's what I mean. If I were talking to you right now and just suddenly I slipped into, Persian or Spanish, I would be saying the same thing that I've been saying all along. It's just you would cease understanding me. And that's the same thing with religion. These are different languages for expressing similar emotions. And I guess I've kind of always seen myself and my career as a kind of, as a translator, really. Like I feel like my job is to translate these metaphors, these languages, so that people understand it. Because I think if you understand the metaphor, then you can have this deep connection in the sentiment. I mean, the Agori are a perfect example of this. I mean, when you first see them, you just think, that's the furthest from my experience as possible, because their metaphor is so foreign. Their metaphor is exotic. It's beyond your experience. But then when you understand what the metaphor means, you suddenly realize, yeah, I believe that. I actually agree with that. That's just kind of, it's always been my goal, whether, in books or in anything else that I do, is to try to get people to break through that external shell and to understand what we all have in common underneath.
What happens, though, when we misinterpret the metaphor? There are many who are, in the room kind of chuckling or, about to hurl over what they were seeing, on the screen. I mean, okay, so the Bible says, the Christian Bible says, or the New Testament rather says that it's not what, goes in that defiles, but what comes out. I'm not sure they had urine in mind, but,
Yeah.
But what happens, though, if we misunderstand or misinterpret the metaphor, carrying your blood of the Lamb, within Christianity, we have the Lord's Supper or communion. Mm-hmm. And what do? This is my body, take, eat.
My blood, yeah.
Wasn't the Agori guy eating
right.
flesh and we were all grossed out about it?
Yeah.
We say, this is my blood. And, the guy was eating from a skull. What's the difference?
I'm not so worried about people misunderstanding the metaphor because by definition, you can't misunderstand the metaphor. This is the problem with religion, right? The problem when you're talking about symbols and metaphors is that by definition, the interpretation of a symbol rests in the person doing the interpretation. And so, I've been trained as a scholar not to say that interpretation is wrong, that interpretation is incorrect, no matter how much I disagree with it, no matter how irrational the interpretation may be, no matter how out of context the interpretation will be. By definition, all interpretations are valid. Not all interpretations are equally reasonable, but all interpretations are valid. My problem is when people confuse the metaphor for the thing itself. That's when you get into trouble. When your faith is in your religion, not in the thing that your religion stands for, that's when you get in trouble.
Okay. But you didn't name the series religion.
No.
You didn't name it faith.
Yes.
You named it believer.
Yeah.
My kids used to believe in Santa Claus.
Right.
I ruined it. They used to believe in the Easter
You blew
Bunny.
it for them.
So what's a believer?
Well, that was on purpose, by the way, because for me, what I'm interested in is the lived experience of religion, right? I think so many times when people talk about religion, whether it's on TV or in classrooms, what they're talking about is what used to be called high religion, right? The religion of temples and priesthoods and scripture. And that religion is irrelevant to the vast majority of people of faith. They just have no connection with it whatsoever. And this is especially true with these modern critics of religion. I think a lot of these critics have these sort of knee-jerk reactions to particularly atrocious things that they might find in a piece of scripture, or to the actions of an institution or a church or the representatives of that church. And then they use those to essentially dismiss the people of faith. And I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is the things that people themselves believe, why they believe it, what they get from that belief. One of my favorite episodes is the episode you saw a little bit in the preview there on Scientology. And I live in Los Angeles, so everybody in Los Angeles has an opinion on Scientology. Like, it's impossible to avoid. It's like that thing you don't bring up in a different dinner conversation. Like, don't bring it up. And I would say that that's fairly true for most Americans, right? But usually when I ask people, tell me something about Scientology, what people talk about is the church. They talk about, the sort of the theology of it. They talk about the corruption or the abuse, all of which is real, but none of which has that much of an influence on just sort of your day-to-day Scientologist who finds succor through this religion. And so, I wanted to do that episode because I was like, yeah, we all get that part, but why do people do this? Why do people know all of that and yet, devoutly believe this? And, when it's Scientology, we push up against it a little bit, right? We're like, oh, but it's weird and it's crazy and it's kind of science fiction-y. But if it's your religion, then it makes perfect sense, right? Everybody in this room can make a distinction between the abuses of the Catholic Church and the little old lady who goes to Mass on Sundays. Nobody draws a line between those two. And yet, it's very difficult to make a distinction between the abuses of the Church of Scientology and the Scientologist who wakes up every morning and strives to get rid of the trauma and the burdens that he or she has carried with them life after life after life. We can't make that same distinction. It's why I was saying earlier to the students, it's why, we just don't, as scholars, we don't use the word cult anymore because the word has lost all meaning, right? It's just a value judgment. It's just my religion's a religion, your religion's a cult. And so the great joke that, we always say is that cult plus time equals religion. So, you can't really talk about religions in that way.
You talked about knowing. And so, okay, there's Morgan Freeman and National Geographic's God. Had her series on belief. South Park, they do what they do.
Yeah.
Every now and again, Jesus will appear on Family Guy. Aaron Magruder's Black Jesus. So what's the role of pop culture? Do we need another, here you go, Believer series, primetime, CNN? Is it sacrilegious?
I think that there are two sort of prevailing trends, particularly in the United States. The first of those is that people are becoming increasingly more interested in religion and religiosity. That's why you are seeing not just the shows that you were talking about, but scripted television series now that are dealing with aspects of, a show about a church community. Like, who would have thought that would be like a primetime television show, or a show, that is just this giant metaphor for the afterlife and heaven, that CBS has. These concepts are becoming more and more important in Hollywood, in entertainment, for the simple fact that people are more interested in them. So that's the first thing. The second trend, however, is that people, while they're becoming more interested in religion, are themselves becoming less religious. Not less spiritual, but less religious. That's a very important distinction to make. Those of you familiar with the work that the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life does, they have, over the last decade, as you know, they've had to, literally create a new category for people who would refuse to check the boxes that they were given. Those boxes are, the various religions, and then agnostic and atheist. And people were simply returning these things blank and saying, none of these are me. And so they created this new category called non-affiliated, which has now become a word. Now people will just say, I'm a non, right? I'm a non. I believe in God. I seek spiritual fulfillment, but I don't want any label or category. I don't want to be called Christian or Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or Buddha. I don't want to be called any of those things. But I also don't want to check the atheist box. And I don't want to check the agnostic box. I want something for myself. In the latest Pew survey, the 2016 Pew survey, nearly 24% of Americans checked that box, which is astonishing. Even more astonishing is the millennials. Under 30, 66% of millennials chose that box. So I think that these two trends are what you are seeing, is that people want to know more about religion, but they don't want to go to church to learn it, right?
Sure.
And so if you don't have church, what's left, right? The TV. It's the closest thing to God most of us actually have. So.
And for people that go, live streaming makes it easier.
Right.
Speaking of live stream, those of you who are joining us via live stream, don't forget to tweet at #CNNATCTS or #believer. We still want to take questions from your audience, so don't forget to submit cards to our CTS staff. So, for those people who, I don't know, drink the Reza Aslan Haterade,
Yes.
supersized,
Not
big
the flavor
gulp,
you think it is.
by the gallons. You just mentioned. So you have atheists, agnostics. They're like, I don't fit in that. The nunners. Here he goes again. First he was evangelical Christian, now he's Muslim.
Well, first I was Muslim,
blah.
then I was an evangelical, then I went back to Islam.
See, there we go. So again, more haterade, bigger size. There's some places you don't go. So some parts of, Africa you don't go, Yoruba traditions, and South America you don't go. So even here at CTS, we have, Christian roots. We have our Jewish Christian Islamic Studies Center. We have Hindu students. We have secular humanist students. What's the series like Believer? So what?
I mean, I think that when I set out to do this show, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't geared towards a faith-based audience. Like, that was the thing that was very important to me. I mean, I always sort of say that I think people who don't come from the faith tradition will enjoy this show more. Because when you come from a faith tradition, no matter how progressive your faith tradition is, it's like you've got a stake in it, right? You've got, you're in the ball game a little bit. And I know that some of you are watching this, especially those first couple acts, and going, what's going to happen here? What is this? What's happening? Whereas I think if you don't have a horse in the race, as it were, you can kind of just enjoy it a lot more. But I do think that insofar as who the intended audience is for this. I mean, obviously, there are those who enjoy this kind of stuff, people who are interested in travel shows and adventure series and issues of faith. But I have a secret audience that I made every one of these episodes for. And hopefully you sort of got it a little bit when you were watching that episode. When you are watching those first few scenes, with that Agori Sadhu, the holy man, and you are thinking to yourself, this is weird, and this is foreign, and this is so frightening, and this is so beyond anything that I have anything to do with. This is not me. I don't get it. And then hopefully, I hope, by the end of the hour, you started thinking to yourself, that's not that foreign, that's not that exotic, that's not that weird, I get it. If I can take you through that journey in every one of these episodes, then I've done my job. Because we're in a place right now in which the otherization of our fellow citizens has become so concretized, right? We're not even, whether it's blacks or Jews or Muslims or Mexicans, right? We have just become categories in this country. We're not even defined by our humanity anymore. And I am somebody who believes that storytelling has the power to actually break through those walls, break through the sort of simple categories of nationality and race and color and creed, and to hit us as human beings. And in the same way that the Agor want to shock the system, right? They do these things in order to make you realize, oh, well, maybe it's, they're not dying. This isn't a polluting thing. I want to shock the system too. I want people to find themselves connecting with faith traditions and believers with whom they thought they had nothing in common. And if you can do that in a 45-minute TV show, maybe you can do it in your life and in your communities.
Someone in our audience asks, your commentary about, the critical seems universally dismissive. Are there critics of religion you admire and enjoy engaging in debate with?
I mean, my intellectual heroes are the critics of religions, whether it's Schopenhauer or Feuerbach or Marx. I mean, these are the people that I was, these were my teachers. What I don't have a lot of patience for is the unthinking critics, people like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or Bill Maher. I think these guys, I mean, it's the lack of intellectualism that's involved in their absolutely sort of knee-jerk, unthinking, fundamentalist criticism of religion is, well, honestly, more than anything else, it's a betrayal of atheism. It's a betrayal of atheism. That's what it is. You know, these guys give atheism a bad name. They really do. And I'm speaking of somebody who knows, you know, that poll after poll, study after study in this country shows that atheists are the single most moral group in the United States. And yet, for a great many people, the face of atheism in this country is the Sam Harris, Bill Maher, Richard Dawkins groups, who aren't even atheists, they're anti-theists. If you're interested in this, you should Google it. Google anti-theism, and you'll understand what this group actually represents.
It's right after alternative facts.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, if you're somebody who believes that faith is the result of an irrational mind, if you're somebody who believes that religion is an insidious evil that has to be forcibly excised from society, if you are somebody who believes that the cause of evil in the world is due to religion, and if you could just rid the world of religion, then we would all be peaceful and prosperous, I don't really have time for that conversation, because it's such an ignorant, unintellectual conversation that I've got better things to do than to take part in it.
Well, but help us though, Reza. I mean, because, and you tell me, is it that what's so compelling and arresting by what we just saw is sort of the intersectionality of religion and economic status and class. And so you have certain Brahmins on top, the Dalits, and perhaps a subsect, the Domes, you know, on the bottom. So, I mean, how can you, I don't know, divorce, excise religion from that economic status? You know, is the horse driving the cart, which is driving which?
Yeah, you can't. You can't divorce it. And that's, I think, you start with that realization. Step one, religion is culture, culture is religion. Step one. I think that the important thing to understand is that religion is, no matter what religion you're talking about, first and foremost a matter of identity. It's much more a matter of identity than it is a matter of beliefs and practices. I brought up Pew just a little while ago. That same survey shows that 72% of Americans called themselves Christian. I want you to stop and think about that for a second. 7 out of 10 Americans. Really? Really? 7 out of 10 Americans are Christian? 7 out of 10 Americans go to church on a regular basis? 7 out of 10 Americans read the Bible regularly? 7 out of 10 Americans can tell you anything about Jesus except that he was born in a manger and died on a cross, because those are the 2 times I go to church? Of course not. The vast, vast majority of that 7 out of 10, when they say, I am a Christian, are not making a faith statement. They're making an identity statement. And as a matter of identity, that is wrapped up in everything else that you are. Your politics, your social views, your economic views, your class, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your ethnicity. All of those things make up who you are, and religion is one of those things. And to think that religion could somehow be untouched by those other things is to not know what religion is. And so, of course, religion is going to be married to society, sometimes for bad. There's no question about it. The same faith that can elicit enormous compassion in one believer can elicit acts of violence in the other.
Then why even talk about it? Why talk about believer? Why?
Because it's, first of all, because it's unavoidable. Because there's no getting around it. I mean, if your answer to the problems of religion is let's get rid of religion, I would remind you of the 20th century, right? The 20th century, the most horrific, bestial acts of human violence in human history occurred in the 20th century. The slaughter of tens of millions of people in the name of religion? No. In the name of nationalism, in the name of socialism, in the name of communism. I mean, the idea that ridding the world of religion will bring us peace is absurd. It's idiotic. So, what do we do then? What do we do when we're confronted with a faith that can be used to promote peace and violence? And what do we do if we actually have to be forced to admit that, you know what, the same scripture that says love your enemies also says slaughter those who don't worship this God? What do you do at that point? Do you just throw the whole thing away? My argument is no. You actually live the values that you hold dear. If you are someone who believes that your faith compels a peaceful world, a world of compassion, of mercy, then it is your job to shout that as loud as possible, to actually confront those who use the same religion for bigotry and xenophobia and violence. It's your job. It's your religion. You have to stand up for it. But to simply say, well, let's just get rid of it and see what happens, it's not how it works.
You mentioned the 73% of Christians. So for those of us here in the U.S., 11/9 happened. 60 million or so voted to get 45 into office. Of those 60 million, Hugh sometimes says 63% were what? Evangelical Christians. 45 says, well, you know, let's talk to the blue-collar workers. So here's a billionaire, blue-collar workers. Talk to them. Why? Because they, the others, they are taking your jobs, the othering those who are decentered. What's one of the first executive orders? It's based back on what? Religion. Let's ban Muslims from 7 different countries from entering. How does a series like Believer help us to live in such, I don't know, vibrant vitriol?
And I would go a little bit further and say that the majority of those evangelicals agree with the refugee ban and the Muslim ban. I would remind everyone that Donald Trump actually got a larger percentage of evangelical votes in this country than George W. Bush did, who was an evangelical. In other words, more evangelicals voted for a man who couldn't name a book in the Bible, right?
2 Corinthians.
Who couldn't, 2 Corinthians was the best he could do, Who, when asked, what's your favorite verse in the Bible, said, it's all great. I like it all. It's all good. A man who, all jokes aside, represents everything that Jesus spoke out against, everything that he died for. This man represents the opposite of that. And yet, he got the largest percentage of evangelical votes in any presidential contest. I don't know what to do with that. What I can say is that my in-laws were part of them. My in-laws are evangelical Christians, and they surprised us by voting for Trump. I think that a large part of it was that Trump made a very simple promise to the evangelical voters: vote for me and I'll get rid of abortion. I mean, he was about as clear as he could get. And I think that for a lot of evangelicals, they were one-issue voters. But I really don't know what to say. It embarrasses me. It embarrasses me. I'm not an evangelical. But just as a person of faith, it shames me. It shames me that's a reality.
We're here at Chicago Theological Seminary, again, UCC affiliated, Jewish, Christian, Islamic studies. Our values are not only just interreligious dialogue, but engagement. You're a member of our board of trustees. There are a number of trustees here, students, faculty. We have students from all walks of life here. Out of the loins of CTS, we talk about social justice. It's in our history. What do we do? There are many of us who've gathered here, yes, to see you, but many alums of Chicago Theological Seminary. We're just launching our Interreligious Institute. What does this do for us?
I hope that, I mean, this may be too much to ask, but it would be great if you watched an episode of these fairly impoverished, struggling Agoris living in a country that is 4 times the size of our population, and that is dealing with some of the same kind of rank bigotry that we are dealing with, but at this sort of profound institutional level. And here they are, this tiny minority, right, whom most people loathe, most people fear, because they have this impression of them. And yet, they truly believe that their spiritual mission is to transform the entire nation, to remove an ideology, the caste system, that is nearly 5,000 years old, and that they're just going to do it. And how are they going to do it? They're not going to do it with those theatrics any longer. They're going to do it by just simply putting their faith into practice. They're going to open up schools. They're going to open up orphanages. They're going to open up leper colonies and clinics. Now they have an environmental group going now to sort of save the environment in India. They're doing it through practice. This is nothing compared to what we've got here, okay? Yeah, all right, so we are in a situation in which a minority of us voted for a pathological liar as our president, which is really the nicest thing that I could say about him in company. And that's not a value judgment. It's actually just observable fact, okay, that he's a pathological liar. And the sort of cynical manipulation of a particular faith community here to help him achieve those goals. Our task is nothing compared to what the Agoris are facing, okay? Our task is to put our faith into practice. And we have the media and politicians and money in order to do it. Institutions like CTS. This should be easy for us. And so I hope that we can. I mean, I really hope that you watch that and you think, I can do that. I can change society. I can use my faith to change the very fabric of this country right now.
Let's thank Reza Aslan. Again, thank you for joining us, for spending some time here at Chicago Theological Seminary. Those of you who've joined us here in person, those of you who've joined us via live stream, thank you for your presence. Thank you to the staff, faculty, students, colleagues, any and everybody associated with this place called Chicago Theological Seminary. Let's give them a hand as well. You are invited next door for more conversation and dialogue. There is coffee and light snacks available for you to continue our conversation. Martin Niemöller says what? They came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Came for the socialists. I said nothing, wasn't a socialist. They came for the trade unionists. I said nothing. I wasn't a trade unionist. They came for the Jews. I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one to speak. Thank you for reminding us that this is not the time to be mute, that we need to speak. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Be safe, be careful, and believe. Good night.